Do you remember this Marvel Snap card, Firestar? It was supposed to be released in December of 2023, but it got mysteriously removed from the release schedule and hasn't been seen in the 2 years since. It is absolutely a forgotten card, a lost card in Marvel Snap, and it's not the only one. We are going to take a look at a bunch of forgotten cards that exist in the game's files. Like, they're there. You can find the art, the logos, the effects, the stats. It's all there, but they just, for one reason or another, haven't ever actually been released, or frankly just got cut from the schedule, like this one. And even more recent examples like Dragon Man. This was actually supposed to come out last month in January of 2026. But it seems like Marvel Snap is cutting back on the number of cards released each month, and stuff like Dragon Man just didn't make the cut. I don't know if they'll revisit this card in the future. I could see something like a Leftovers season where some of these cards that have been designed and chilling and just waiting actually finally get released. Otherwise, we might never see Dragon Man make it into Marvel Snap. It could even maybe be like redesigned in the future. We just don't know, but these are just two of many examples we're going to cover in this video. Some new, some very, very old that have been there since the very beginning, and others somewhere in between. But I thought we would go ahead and kick things off here with Firestar and talk about, just what kind of impact this card might have alongside all the others. So Firestar, as she was teased in those data mines way back when, was a 6/4 with an on reveal. Each card you played last turn gains +3 power. And I remember when we first talked about this card, I actually thought she was going to be crazy strong stuff, like a Sasquatch deck, basically, where you're dumping a bunch of cards. We've got, Mysterio still works really well with these sort of interactions where you play a Mysterio and perhaps even like a Hitmonkey on turn 5, right? And then you slam Firestar on turn 6. She's giving each of those things played 3 extra power. That was like 4 cards in that example. That's +12. That makes the 6/16 in total output. Those can be some really big plays. And, you could do even more than that with any kind of little bounce deck that's returning cheap stuff to hand. Play a Mysterio and 4 0-cost 1-drops or whatever. And still a Hitmonkey, right? And then still Firestar and just dump ridiculous amounts of points, and nicely spread points as well, which is cool. So I thought this looked like it could be very powerful, very impactful. At the time, I even thought maybe they pulled this from the schedule because it was going to be too good. As I recall, it was going to be released basically around like the holiday break, near like Christmas and New Year's at the end of the year. And I thought, hey, maybe this is just too good. They didn't want to risk it. They couldn't patch it in time. So they just like held it for a minute, and then it'll eventually get released down the road. But it has never been mentioned since. Beyond that, I found out today, apparently, according to snap.fan, supposedly the art for this card has been removed from the game files. Snap.fan says they manually added the art back. It's still missing in the game files, which is actually kind of crazy because there's tons of old art and just like leftover stuff in the game files. I don't like clean up the game files very often, and you're going to see plenty of examples in this video of art that's just been there that's never been used. So why did they manually go in and remove Firestar's art? This is making my like conspiratorial brain spin a little bit. Like, was there some sort of rights issue or legal dispute or like mandate from Marvel that Firestar couldn't be released? I don't know. Does anybody know any stories about this card or this character that could lead to something like that? Perhaps that's why Firestar never got saw, and it wasn't due to balance or design. Because you'd think in the 2 years since, if it was like a balance or design issue and they had this thing fully made out, and like I'm sure they had some visual effects and all that stuff, you'd think they'd revisit it and release it, but they never did. So this card remains one of Marvel Snap's biggest mysteries in my mind. I still have no idea what's going on with Firestar, but I do think she'd be a competitive and good card and could give some second life to that sort of bounce, Sasquatch, Hitmonkey, Mysterio sort of stuff that probably needs a little boost. And I really don't think she'd be overpowered these days either. I think she'd fall right in line with some of the big, powerful stuff that we have. So I would love to revisit Firestar, or at the very least revisit this sort of effect, even if it's on a different character. I do think this would be a pretty sweet card to see. And more than anything, I would just like to know what happened to this one. I would love to hear everybody's theories on the missing Firestar. So for our next forgotten card here, I wanted to take a look at Tombstone. This one I first looked at in one of my data mine videos in August of 2024. So basically a year and a half ago, it looked like this one was going to make the cut in the game. That was alongside cards like Gore, the God Butcher, Agony, Fenris Wolf. Think about how long those have been in the game, right? Tombstone was supposed to join them and never did. And we've never heard from him once again since, which is surprising. This is actually a character I knew and recognized from the Marvel world, which, you know, has not always been the case with Marvel Snap. But I think I had an action figure of this guy as a kid. I think, you know, Spider-Man cartoon, all that. So pretty big name. And I thought a neat card too. A 4/6 here costs 1 if an enemy card was destroyed last turn. Kind of that Miles Morales effect, but, you know, you have to destroy something. Maybe giving a card like Elektra some cool impact, you know, extra Killmonger help. Shang-Chi in that day and age was very, very common. So this could be a cool little power spike to follow up an early Shang-Chi, which I think it's kind of cool to encourage an early Shang-Chi instead of one that's always played as a surprise factor on the final turn, you know. That was a sort of neat idea here for Tombstone. So not every deck is going to be destroying enemy cards, but I think there's enough tools that this could have made its way into a deck. A 1/6 is a very powerful little swing card for Marvel Snap. So I like this one. I thought it was going to be pretty good, pretty neat, great character, and once again was very surprised that it did not actually get released. And I don't know that we ever heard why. I maybe it just didn't have a season it lined up with. I think we anticipated it maybe landing in like a Spider-Man season, and it just never happened. But certainly a character Marvel Snap very much needs to revisit. I think rather iconic compared to a lot of the other you know, unseen characters we've had in Marvel Snap so far. So we got to get a Tombstone in the game, even if it's not this design, if it's updated. I think this character just really needs to be in Marvel Snap one way or another. But I think this design is still kind of interesting. It might be too weak these days, particularly with the fall off of Shang-Chi. Could perhaps use a little bit of a buff, maybe a 4/7, 4/8's probably pushing it too far. But still an interesting idea here for a card that definitely needs to be in the game. So next up here is our buddy Dum Dum. This guy was supposed to come out in the Captain Carter season, which you can see from his effect very much syncs up with Captain Carter. 2/3 ongoing. Your front row cards here have +1 power, can't add to itself. But this is just, you know, a great little cheap buff for a Captain Carter that can snowball into more buffs, which is nice. In total output, you kind of expect this to be a 2/5, which is nothing crazy, but as you scale it with those other tools, you know, it becomes much, much better. Also, I will say, like, ongoing decks do sometimes just want better 2-drops to slot in. Sometimes you're just running like an armor in that deck or something, a Gorgon, because you don't have a 2-drop that directly contributes to power. So I think Dum Dum would actually still really slot nicely into a Spectrum ongoing deck with that Captain Carter synergy or not. In both cases, this might just be kind of one of your best power output 2-drops. Goliath in there now, of course, is great, but you need more than just one. So I think this card would be rather viable. I mean, ongoing decks aren't super powerful at the moment, but have had their time to shine here and there. Card like this might help give them that little boost to get them over the hump. And as for why this one wasn't released, again, your guess is as good as mine. Nothing about this screamed broken to me or overpowered. It feels more like some kind of scheduling thing or some other problem we can't really anticipate. But yet another like character and card I think would be rather welcome in Marvel Snap. I maybe could even buff this one a little bit, I think, if you really wanted to. But I think, you know, release this as a Series 4 card, give people a little boost, make it cheap, drop it in a game mode, something here to get Dum Dum in the game, because I think ongoing players would really rather enjoy this one. So for our next 3 cards, these were supposed to come out last month in the Dragon season, and that seemed to be the stage where Marvel Snap is now kind of cutting back a little bit on the number of cards per season. So we had Dragon Man, Brand of Shou-Lao, a collectible skill, and Dragon Breath, all cut from the release schedule here. And we've talked about these pretty recently in like various data mined videos of late, so I didn't want to spend too much time on each of these, but just to cover them, Dragon Man was a 4/6 end of turn, +1 power for each location that's full on your side. I will say this design always seemed a little clunky to me. Like, it's just hard to fill out locations like early enough for an end of turn to start really kind of stacking up. So it felt like even at the end of the game, sometimes it's still hard to fill out locations, even if this only hit once or twice. You know, maybe this gets up like 4-9, 4-10, 4-11 range, which is solid, but certainly nothing crazy. Some end of turn bonuses could help, but it's kind of expensive for some of those end of turn decks. They tend to like to have cheaper, bigger scalers like the Athena and the Havocs of the world. So I did think this one was going to land in no man's land a little bit, where I don't know that it really had a deck where it was going to shine. I don't think Zoo decks really made enough sense for it. So, I mean, not like super sad to miss this from a design standpoint, but I do think this is a really cool character. Another character I actually recognized and knew from before Marvel Snap, which is nice. So I hope they certainly don't leave Dragon Man sitting forever. But if he does come back, maybe a little boost, or maybe just a different meta that could unlock some of the potential here on this one, because I don't think he would have made a huge impact as is. Now for Brand of Shou-Lao, this was that one cost collectible skill. On reveal, one of your other cards here steals 2 power from the character that costs the most in your opponent's hand. So a little bit of an affliction against big stuff, but also a targeted power boost if you want. Of course, that hits your Captain Carter, your Scarlet Spider, your Iron Man, whatever. That's really nice. And I do think, in fact, this would probably be used often with like a Shou-Lao Scarlet Spider deck to buff Scarlet Spider and, of course, be a cheap activator for your Shou-Lao. So this might have wreaked some havoc in the Shou-Lao meta. It might be a good thing this actually did not land as yet another great enabler. Probably still a good card. You know, it's a 4-point swing on power in total if the opponent plays that card, but also like discouraging their high-powered stuff could be nice. Could hit key targets too. That zombie Galacti in hand or whatever. So seemed like a pretty good card, but not necessarily one that I need to be in the game. Moving on to Dragon Breath, 4-cost collectible skill. On reveal, give a 5-cost or higher character in your hand +3 power, and then afflict an enemy card at each location with -2 power. So in total, that's kind of a 9-point power output. -2, -2, and -2, and then +3. So kind of -6 and +3, assuming your opponent has cards at each location, which, you know, if you're playing this on 4, that's going to happen rather often. Not always, but can still expect 7 or 9 points out of this. Plus that +3, of course, can scale again with better targets. Hit the Iron Man. I thought this looked pretty interesting with Zombie Galacti, as we had just teased in the other direction. Great way to like hit a big isolated target, because this is only hitting 5-cost or higher. Zombie Galacti decks often only have Zombie Galacti as the bigger card with lots of cheaper stuff. So I do think this would have been a pretty cool buff to Zombie Galacti, which, you know, is now a good card. Like, it got buffed enough on its own separately that it became a good card. But this really could have pushed it to a whole nother level, honestly, as a pretty powerful tool that's also, you know, just doing work independently on its own. Could also be an affliction support card, you know, use this with your Ajax or whatever. So this does look pretty powerful. It does have a few different decks that are kind of interesting for it. This would probably be a welcome piece of a lot of people's collections if they do revisit this one. Although I did kind of hate how this seemed like a rather generic like name or like skill or whatever. I think stuff like Fastball Special is really cool because that's like a known named thing from the Marvel world. This is like the most generic skill ever, which I don't love that side from a flavor standpoint, but from a mechanic standpoint, I did think this design was pretty neat. So moving forward, we're going to shift gears a little bit and take a look at cards that have never actually officially like been on a schedule, or even like unofficially been on a schedule via like a data mined schedule. So for instance, Random here behind me has been in the game files for as long as I can remember, maybe all the way back to day one, but this has never been an officially slated release. Like, it's just been chilling there with the logo, with the art that looks like real official art, and I think a design that still today remains a powerful and pretty cool design. This is a 4/0 with on reveal, set this card's power equal to the power of a random card in your deck. So potentially, you know, a way to cheat out some really big points here on a 4-cost card. Gives me sort of Jubilee vibes. You're spending 4 to potentially get something really big out of your deck. Arguably a little worse than Jubilee, because often pulling that card out of your deck is better, because, you know, you get to realize stuff like on reveals and you still get the power out of it. Does have some space restrictions, but ultimately I would say Jubilee's a little better. That said, Random could still exist, you know, coincided with that. Could be something really cool in like a Mr. Negative deck, for instance, where this flips over to 0 cost. So still some applications for this card, and I think it would still be, you know, competitive in big card sort of decks. Less good with stuff like Fin Fang Foom, but still occasionally hitting that big Infinite or whatever could be pretty sweet. I wonder if you could almost push this to 3, but that seems like a dangerous precedent. Seems maybe too strong at 3. So you also could say, you know, make this like a 4/3 and gain power equal to that card's power in your deck. So it gets a little bit of a distinction and maybe bigger power from something like Jubilee, living in a Dracula space instead of in hand, you know, going for deck. But you know, some options to maybe tweak this to get it up to modern standards. But I always thought this was a pretty cool design and a reasonably viable card. And again, no idea why this has never been implemented. Maybe just waiting for the right season or something for random, maybe some other issue we can't imagine. But ultimately, pretty cool looking character that I'm not super familiar with, but looks awesome, and a card design I like too. So next up here, we've got Mephisto. And this one, again, has been in the game forever, I think since day one. You'll also note here, I have proposed my own version of the card this time around, because I think some of these text lines we're going to see, some of these effects, are so old that they don't really feel like that's what the card would be if it were released. Nor do they feel like they kind of live up to the modern day standards of Marvel Snap. So I'm going to be proposing some redesigns just to kind of spice this video up a little bit. This is something I'd done in the past when we talked about last cards. I wanted to do it again. But Mephisto here, as you'll see, the version in the game is a 6/0, and he reads, if you win this game, double your winnings. So like this just like all in card, like, hey, you want extra cubes, cool, but you got to find a way to play a 6/0, which I like that there's no downside risk except the 6/0, but that's just like impossibly difficult to use, right? Outside of maybe Mr. Negative flipping it to a 0/6 and just kind of tossing it in for free. I wanted to open up the card a little bit for my version, so actually giving it some power, but also giving it that downside risk where it actually could double your losses as well. So if you go like -8 cubes, you'd really go -16. So then it's like, okay, can I win this game while playing a 6/10? And am I willing to take that risk? I think that's a more interesting space. I even thought about pushing those numbers further, like 6/12, 6/14, whatever, right? Because that's still kind of an honest card. But I wanted it to be kind of living on the edge a little bit, where I thought, okay, like a skilled player with a really good deck could probably use Mephisto to great effect, where it's like they set up wins confidently enough where they know a 6/10 is still going to be competitive. Maybe it's like a big deck, a hella deck, whatever, where you can afford to get a 6/10 in and still win. This could be a way to kind of accelerate your climb with known risk. So I liked this idea of a high skill cap card that manipulates cubes. I didn't want to like totally redesign it. I wanted to play with the like double your winnings or whatever. So just kind of reworded it and gave it some stats. Who knows? I don't know if I'd be willing to play this. It'd be hilarious for videos, but I'd still be very scared to do this off stream, like while actually climbing. But I think it would be easier to use than the 6/0 version of this, even with that risk. Could be fun to kind of play around with those cube numbers. So the next card up here is Jonah Jameson. This one, again, has been in the game for a really long time. I will also note I made this logo. The logo's not in the game, but I thought it'd be fun to make some custom logos the last time around I did this. So this is that same logo. But in the game, he's a 1/1 with ongoing. Your emotes are ruder, which is clearly just kind of like a troll text line that does nothing, right? It has no actual material impact on the game, which means this would never actually really get played. You know, maybe an ongoing deck could toss it in, but it's just 1,000 times worse than Ant-Man or whatever. So I thought, like, okay, what if you actually did do a version where it had a gameplay impact? And Jonah Jameson was a 1/3 that reads, after your opponent emotes, +1 power, which initially I thought it'd be funny if that was an ongoing, but then that means you could slam it down on turn 6 after they had emoted like 10 times and just get like a 1/11 for free or whatever, right? So it's a little more honest if it's a card you play down, they get to see it if they're paying attention and recognize the effect, and then they have a choice about emoting, right? If they want to emote, they have to give you points for it, right? It's a trade, which I think people would do. I think people would have fun with that. I actually think it'd be really cool. Like, it's probably not going to get points very often. It's probably a 1/3 to base, which normally I would have made this a 1/2, but 1/3 seems to be their baseline for 1-drops now with upsides. So 1/3 really would help it get in play. And it would be this fun little back and forth thing where it's like, I can give them 1 point for an emote. Like, I'm going to lose that location anyway. Let's boost this thing up to 20, whatever, right? I think it would really create some interesting, hilarious moments in Marvel Snap. So I would actually welcome this card. I think this is a cool little design that breaks the rules in a funny way, that's still kind of a troll and a meme that lives to the spirit of what's in the game now, but actually also is sort of almost viable enough that you would play this sometimes just for fun. So next up, we've got a character called Slingshot, which in the game files is still actually called Yo-Yo, which I think is her real name, but her like code name is Slingshot, which Marvel Snap goes back and forth on those. But that's, I think, a logo from a comic or something I grabbed last time around with this sort of video. Slingshot is a 1/2 in the game files, and it reads, when this card moves, move it back with 1 power, which is her like superpowers, like super speed, and then going back where she was. That's not a very strong ability though in Marvel Snap these days. Like +1 per move just does not scale remotely well compared to all the other move effects that are scaling way more per move. You know, the moving back is kind of its own additional upside. You know, you could use that to trigger your Hydra Stomp or your Kraven, whatever. So like you could argue. I don't think that's enough though. I think also we have so many move cards right now that are just all about like when it moves, power scale. For my version, I wanted to mix things up a little bit and make her a card that can scale a Kraven and a Hydra Stomper, but that's what she's primarily about, is getting the number of times you're moving up to like play to those other synergies. So I had an end of turn, move this card to the right, and then if in the right location, instead move it to the left location. So basically every single turn, this card is going to move, which means, you know, you're ticking up your Hydra Stomper a lot. You're occasionally moving into those Kraven spots. You're hitting a Hercules and moving even more, right? And it becomes this sort of little engine of moving that doesn't scale because maybe you have enough scalers already, or at least doesn't scale itself, but plays to the other cards. It discounts your miles. You know, it hits all these other little things that care about that. It seemed more interesting to me to kind of divert and go for an engine card as opposed to yet another one that does sort of the same thing as all the other vultures and torches and so on. Debatable, but I don't know, at least my idea. Also, she is, you know, still eventually reverting back to the same spot that she was every time, even if it takes a couple turns. So I don't know. I'm not the biggest move player or enjoyer, so who knows if that's a good design, but I thought it was something different and unique anyway. So next up here is Goblin Queen, another character and design that's been in the game forever, but both this art and the logo are not in the game. This is just random Goblin Queen art and a logo that I made long ago, last time I did this sort of video. But in the game, she is a 2/3 that reads, on reveal, other cards can't be revealed this turn. So sort of a super giant effect, but I guess one that just absolutely demands priority if you want it to impact your opponent, or if for some reason you want to delay your own reveals. I don't know why that would matter too much though. I mean, in theory, you know, like baking a Shadow King in or something like on turn 5 so that it hits whatever your opponent played on turn 5 going into your turn 6. Sure. But, you know, it's just like awkward. It's just like a different card. I thought about something that's in the same spirit for my version here, but just pushing it to that next level, which is on reveal, the next card you play stays unrevealed until all other cards are revealed this game. So not even just an end of game sort of effect, like say an Invisible Woman where you're just revealing your cards at the end of game, but until all other cards, like even your opponent's end of game stuff, is going to reveal first. This is like making sure basically whatever I play next is going to have no priority. It's going to be last. So for instance, Shadow King again, make sure this Shadow King goes off last no matter what. Of course, if there's multiple Goblin Queens, I guess you would just stack them in order or whatever. But, you know, just ensuring that that card is going to be last. So maybe it's just a Silver Surfer sometimes. Maybe it's a Shadow King. Maybe it's a Shang-Chi, whatever. So that you don't have to worry about priority. And you just get to do your thing last, which, I don't know, might have some interesting gameplay impacts. Again, I didn't want to change these cards too much, trying to keep in the spirit of the design, but just evolving it a little bit, because I do think these designs are from like day one of Marvel Snap. They've been in the game forever. I think all of the ones we're talking about right now will be updated in some fashion if they return to the game and actually get released. They'll be updated in some way or another to modernize them and fit the current stage of the game. So next up here is Toad. This is another one where the art and logo are not in the game, but the effect is. It's also a familiar effect. Toad is a 2/3 in the game with on reveal, move the last card you played to this location, which we know is now a Ghost Spider, and it's also now much cheaper as well. So clearly if this got released, it would not be Ghost Spider. I do think like the Ghost Spider animation, when I think about it though, is like kind of similar to Toad. Like they probably envisioned it as Toad's tongue reaching out and grabbing something and pulling it to it, which Ghost Spider does like webs now or whatever. But you know, clearly gonna have to be changed if it's added to Marvel Snap. Now, this is an idea that's not quite as in the spirit of the original Toad, because obviously that's just a card that exists. So I changed things up here a little more for my version. A 2/3 that reads, on reveal, force a 1-cost card here to switch sides. Again, kind of using that tongue to grab something and pull it over. I liked the idea of, you know, instead of maybe like an Electra that's deleting a 1-cost card, what if you could actually make it a higher risk for your opponent to put a really powerful 1-drop out? Sunspot, Nebula, Jim Hammond, etc. And use this to actually swing those points in your favor. You know, kind of a nice punish a little bit for some of that like scary Sunspot stuff we see out there. I think it'd be cool. But also do note the wording on this. You have to be careful because this could force one of your cards. It does not say an enemy card. So you could use this to send a hood over to your opponent, or you'd have to be careful if you had your own 1-drop you didn't want to lose, you might have to play Toad somewhere else, right? It's a little bit of a consideration there from a positioning standpoint. But I like this sort of tool to answer those really scary scaling 1-drops in a more kind of decisive way than something like Electra, which doesn't feel quite as swingy as this could. So next up here is Flatman, another one whose art and logo aren't in the game, but the effect is it's a 2/2. Ongoing adjacent locations have +1 power. So that is really just a mini Mr. Fantastic, which just doesn't seem to hold up. Seems much weaker here. It's kind of 4 points in total output's not enough. So I just went ahead and evolved that a little bit for my version. Ongoing adjacent locations have +1 power for each empty space. So this would potentially scale much higher. You know, if you only played in the middle location with a deck that was like, you know, Flatman, Mr. Fantastic, Omega Red, and Onslaught. Maybe you could do something cool there. Maybe you'd have to use an Iron Man to make sure you, you know, can win one spot more decisively. But, you know, basically leaving spots open becomes an interesting gameplay mechanic where maybe this gives you 4 and 4 because you leave all those spots open. And this is suddenly a 10 power card for 2, even stronger maybe than Mr. Fantastic, but with some, you know, design hooks where you have to think about how to utilize it. Even 3 spots still makes this competitive or better than Mr. Fantastic. So maybe there's like a Namora deck where you just put 1/1 and have a Flatman in the middle with a Namora and spread your power out that way. But just, you know, kind of evolving that design, giving it some hooks where you have to think a little bit more about how to utilize it, giving it a cool little deck game plan seemed more interesting and like the sort of thing we'd see in Marvel Snap today. So then the final card in the video with an effect and stats in the game is Night Nurse. Again, this logo and artwork are not in the game, but Night Nurse in the game is a 2/2 with on reveal, add all cards you discarded or destroyed last turn to your hand, which I think this is a interesting and fine sort of effect. We have a few things like this nowadays, you know, like Moira X is sort of the same kind of idea, just a slightly different angle, but you know, very flavorful fit too for a nurse, kind of like bringing stuff back to life basically that has died literally on board or discarded is kind of like dying. So you know, there's probably some tweaks you can make on this. I don't know if it needs to be 2. Stats could probably be bigger, you know, few ways to spin this one, but I think this effect is actually just totally fine and interesting and, you know, maybe not super strong, but could fit in the game today. So then our final 2 cards for this video are a bit of a unique scenario that we haven't run into before. These are cards which have art and logos in the game. So like new modern cards that might be coming out or might have already been planned to have come out, but never got an ability or stats. So not exactly forgotten cards necessarily, but something unusual is perhaps going on with these. Garrison Kane, as I learned while looking this up, seems like it would have been maybe in the Weapon X season we just had in December. Seems like a flavor fit there. So I don't know if he maybe got cut from the Weapon X season. Maybe there's another season coming up soon he'll fit, but he doesn't really seem to fit into like the Apocalypse season that's upcoming. Or the like Daredevil season that's upcoming. I don't know. But anyway, since he doesn't have any stats or an effect, I thought, hey, let's just design a totally new card. This will be really fun. I looked up the character. It seems like he kind of evolves his weapons and powers and like gets new limbs and attachments and stuff. So A fun idea that could also play into the Weapon X season a little bit with a card like Aurora is giving him all 4 of the keywords, each of which kind of give him basically +1 power or more. So on reveal, +1 power, end of turn, +1 power, activate, +1 power, ongoing, +1 power. Each of these kind of representing a new enhancement, a new weapon or whatever that's added to his suit or frame or body or whatever. Which would be really cool because you would satisfy Aurora all in one card. The numbers here, if you kind of count it out, don't get like crazy or out of hand. You know, if you played this on the final turn, this would basically be a 3-4. If you had end of turn hitting from turn 3 on, then this would be a sort of 3-7. So landing in a nice little sweet spot there for a 3-drop. But any additional ongoing synergies or end of turn synergies could maybe scale it up or help a little. And then, you know, Aurora hits this one in a really big way. So I thought this was kind of a neat design, like stuff it all in there and make it all match up. I actually think this is really cool and could absolutely be a real card in Marvel Snap, and one that I frankly would like to play. So then our final card is Foggy Nelson. Again, same story here. We've got art and a logo. And of course, we have a Daredevil season coming up, according to data mines. And this is clearly a fit for the Daredevil season, but all the other Daredevil cards have already been data mined. They've already got effects. They've already got, stats. So he's been left out. That makes me wonder, is he actually going to make the cut, or is he going to be sort of like the brand of Shou-Lao Dragon Man variety where they initially had something cooked up for him, but he's on pause because they've lowered the number of releases in a given season, and maybe they never fully implemented him because they just decided, hey, we don't need this next card. So I thought, hey, let's take a crack at Foggy Nelson. I think everybody's going to love this one. I made him a 3-3 ongoing. Your opponent can't gain bonus energy. You hate Star-Lord? Well, guess what? Foggy objects. He's a lawyer. This is what I thought. Objection. You do not get bonus energy. I thought that was kind of a fun idea, locking up your opponent with the lawyering. Hey, it's not fair to have extra energy. That's cheating. So kind of a, like a Mobius style card that limits what your opponent can do. I don't really know if I love tech cards like this that are all in on kind of denying one thing. That can be sort of frustrating, but at the same time right now, this would be a pretty nice release valve to have for the meta with all of this absolutely crazy energy cheat. Play a little more fair thanks to Foggy Nelson. So this one was kind of a fan service for everybody out there, meta service, if you will, but still, I think a reasonable take on the character actually with that whole lawyer spin. So yeah, that wraps it up, folks. These are the lost cards right now, the forgotten cards of Marvel Snap. There's a lot of really cool potential just sort of sitting in the game files these days. A couple seasons worth of cards here almost, I think, if they ever wanted to implement, this cool art, these characters. I mean, certainly some fairly recognizable characters here. Jonah Jameson, Dragon Man, Tombstone, all characters I certainly knew ahead of time. So I don't know. I don't know what the story is on these. I don't know when they're going to come, if ever, but curious to hear what you guys think on all these designs, all these lost cards, what you'd like to see, what you'd do with these. All those thoughts and more belong down in the comments below. Thanks much, as always, for watching, and I guess I will see you around.